Steve here. It's the show where I answer your questions, and this week my first question comes from Bagser1. Hey Steve, I've been doing stand-up comedy as a hobby for a few years, and in the last year or so, I've been trying to purge my act of the kind of childish, faux, edgy stuff I did starting out in order to grow and mature as a performer. I was wondering if there were any topics that would personally leave you or your audience feeling cold towards a performer. Are there certain topics that have no place in a comedy club, period, or is it a matter of approach and intent? Yeah, don't make fun of white people. We're super sensitive about that. No, for me personally, I can't speak for my audience, but for me, it's a matter of approach and intent. I don't think that there should be topics that are just completely off limits. There may be topics that you as a comic should not wade into. Maybe you are not the best person to address a particular subject, and that's a decision you have to make for yourself. But in general, no, the topic isn't nearly as important as the approach and the intent. I'm a very, very, very big proponent of the theory that comedy should punch up and not punch down. If your comedy is about rhetorically pushing people down into the mud and pointing and laughing at them, then I think that's the problem, not the specific people you choose to target. If your comedy is mean and condescending and vicious and just about, ah ha ha ha, look at those weirdos, aren't they weird, let's laugh at them, then it doesn't matter what subject you choose. I'm probably not going to like your stuff. But if you take a more introspective look, if you're about deconstructing social norms, if you're about examining your own behavior and your own prejudices and your own shortcomings and the absurdities of your own life and your own attitudes, then that can be fertile ground, and you can use that to examine almost anything. And there are so many brilliant comics who have done things like that. Richard Pryor, Chris Rock, George Carlin, Louis C.K., Mark Maron. The list goes on and on and on. Dave Chappelle. All of these people have done problematic things in their act, but they have all also done absolutely brilliant routines that are about deconstructing their own shortcomings or pointing at things that are wrong with society or ways in which society fails people and making that funny, but also giving it a layer of insight and of commentary. And I think if you're able to accomplish that, it doesn't matter what topic you choose. You can choose the most hot button, risque, controversial topic that you can imagine. And if you handle it in a way that is intelligent and responsible and find a way to make it funny without denigrating and demeaning and disparaging people, then I say go for it. Captain Andy, hi Steve. I was tidying up while I watched this video and it made me think, do you ever have trouble throwing things away? I often struggle to throw things away because part of me is somehow convinced that I might need them one day, or might be able to fix them one day, or might just miss them when they're gone. I've managed to apply this weird logic to a number of obviously useless things, such as old packaging material and old concert flyers, old creative writing of mine that I am certain I don't like, etc., etc. Have you ever struggled with anything like this? Sure, to an extent. You have probably, if you watch these videos of mine specifically, in the past caught fleeting glimpses of this corner over here, which is stacked full of mostly empty gift bags from past holidays, and the excuse for keeping those is that we reuse them, which we do. Of course, we only reuse them once a year when we're wrapping certain Christmas presents that could do with a gift bag instead of like a proper box. And we use maybe 3 or 4 of them, and then the rest of them are just there in the pile. I should really just clean that out. I should just trash that whole thing. But I don't, because I have this conceit that, but I use those, you know? So yeah, I can relate. I find that when you do throw things away, that it is just incredibly liberating. I've 3 or 4 times since we've lived here, I've gone through the process of cleaning out my dresser drawers and taking clothes that I never wear anymore, or that are too old, or that have shrunk in the wash and don't really fit me anymore, taking them and just getting rid of them, donating them to like a clothing drive, and just getting them away and freeing up the space, and eventually buying new clothes, and going through cleaning out the clutter, filling garbage bags full of stuff that is just sitting around that I never use and I don't need, and throwing it away. It is so liberating to do that. It feels so good to do that. So yeah, I can relate to the feeling of accumulating clutter and rationalizing it, but I can also tell you that, God damn it, getting rid of it is just fantastic. Justin Parallax, who do you think is a superhero character who best exemplifies the ideas of equality, progressiveness, and social justice? Would you consider Batman, who has often been depicted as a violent and authoritarian borderline fascist type, i.e. Frank Miller's version, or Superman, who has often been represented problematically too, or someone else? I would say Superman in his earlier form, when he was if you read the original Superman comics, which have been reprinted dozens of times, and they're easy to find, from the first couple years, from the pre-war years, the early Superman. And even if you watch the Fleischer Superman comic book, Fleischer cartoons, which are very representative of that early Superman, I think he's a very populist hero at that point. He fights for the little guy. He fights for the working class, for the poor. His enemies are often rich, powerful people who are trying to exploit the poor, or who are trying to impose their will through their wealth, or through criminal activities, or through misused science on vulnerable people. So I think that early form of Superman is a very good candidate for best social justice superhero. Wonder Woman was originally created as an intentionally feminist character. She is a great candidate for that as well. Green Arrow from the 70s, when he was sort of changed into this progressive crusader for the working class, this sort of socialist, pro-labor, pro-social justice superhero. He's definitely one to think about. And there are others too. But the problem with those characters I just named, as some of you may have noticed, is that they're all white people. And that's a problem with social justice, with mainstream social justice activism in general, is that it's too dominated by people who look like me. It's too dominated by white folks. There are comic book superheroes who are people of color, and who even have occasionally been written and drawn by people of color, which is even better, who would fit this mold. I would suggest maybe someone like Luke Cage, or the new Spider-Man, Miles Morales, would be good candidates for that as well. Sam Wilson's version of Captain America. But they haven't quite gained the popularity yet. They haven't quite hit mainstream saturation point where everybody knows who they are. But those are good candidates as well. Batman could be. Batman isn't really, or at least for the most part, hasn't been what I would call a great social justice hero. Because there is something inherently problematic about a rich, powerful white guy choosing to spend his money on bat-shaped cars and dressing up in a costume and armor and going out and beating up criminals at night. There's something very authoritarian and very fascist about just him choosing, about a powerful individual choosing to do that. And that is an elephant in the room for Batman in general. And as much as I love Batman, I love Batman, okay? I love Batman. But that is definitely a part of the character that the writers have either not realized or have very, very intentionally ignored for most of his run. Because it's definitely a problem that needs to be dealt with. And until somebody can find a very clever way of dealing with that while remaining consistent with the core of the character, I don't know if I would be comfortable saying that Batman is a great social justice superhero. But I love him anyway. The Nightmare Rider. Hi, Steve. With the rise of Trump and the success of the Republican Party, on top of the failure of the Democrats to unite the left against the far right, it seems to me that the lingering red scare of American culture that paints the word socialism as something evil and oppressive is still having a lingering ripple effect on popular public discourse, with Bernie Sanders being an amazing exception. Given how the general public seems to be eternally hung up on the woefully inaccurate straw man version of socialism that those on the far right like to perpetuate, What do you think it would take to remove this stigma and convince the American people that socialism is not a slippery slope down to Stalinist-style communism? What needs to be done to convince people that socialism can be beneficial to the working class? I think the Democratic Party needs to tell that story. I think the Democratic Party needs to embrace being a left-wing party. Socialistic institutions have been a part of this country for generations, since the 19th century. If you've ever used a public library, that's a socialist institution. If you've ever driven on the interstate highway system, that's a socialist institution. If you've ever taken a train on Amtrak, depending on how you define socialism, there's almost nothing in our country that hasn't been touched by some form of it or another. Even though the government doesn't own and control these various industries, it has certainly done a great deal to prop them up from time to time, to subsidize them. And our tax dollars have been a great source of funding and of support for a whole plethora of things in this country that we take for granted. And the Democratic Party needs to stop running from that, needs to stop allowing the Republicans to lie and misrepresent and shape the narrative and control the conversation, and start taking back the microphone and saying, hey, enough of this bullshit. And when they do that, and then the narrative regarding socialism is actually influenced and shaped by people who know what it is and know what its contribution to America has been and could be, then that will change. But as to when that will happen, I have no idea. Don't ever put money on the Democratic Party growing a spine. The Patrician, hey Steve, new YouTuber, planning to start making content soon. Wanted to get your opinions regarding a recent influx of somewhat worrying political ideologies into a certain community I'm sure you're familiar with. Specifically YouTubers who openly identify with the alt-right movement and white nationalism. I am concerned with the lack of criticism that has been directed at this new strain of pernicious political thought, and I intend to challenge that lack of criticism and deconstruct its ideology as one of my first projects. Also, would you be interested in a collaborative effort to directly address the YouTube community as to the danger of this new political ideology? I don't know about a collaboration. You'd have to talk with me in private about that, and we'd have to work out what you wanted me to do and if I would be able and willing to do that. But in terms of the alt-right and white nationalism becoming pervasive within certain circles of the YouTube community, yeah, I agree, it's a problem. And to me, an even bigger problem than people who openly identify with the alt-right or with white nationalism are people who claim that they don't, who claim that they're not alt-right, that they're not white nationalist or white supremacist, and get really, really angry if you say that they are. But yet everything they say sounds so much like what people in the alt-right are saying or what white nationalists are saying. It's very strange. And it's that kind of low-key, undercover white nationalism and alt-right identification that I think is really dangerous. People who say, "Oh, come on, I'm just expressing an opinion. It was just a joke. I just think that's funny. I'm just asking questions." They avoid identifying themselves specifically with the alt-right. They might even say, "Oh, I hate the alt-right. The alt-right, they're a bunch of losers. No, come on, I'm not alt-right." But then they push the same right-wing talking points. They piss and moan about white genocide. They piss and moan about having to use the proper pronouns for trans people. They stoke hysteria and vilification of immigrants, particularly Muslim immigrants. And they do all of the same things that the alt-righters are doing, but they say, "Oh, but that's not me. That's not me." Those are the most dangerous people. Joe McClory, over the past few years, with growing calls for accountability for officers that kill the people they are meant to protect, there have also been people that seem to have doubled down on their belief that police officers are in the right to do whatever they want. Some of this has expressed itself in things like "I support the badge" or "I back the blue" signs. While it is possible that these people and businesses do help support law enforcement in a financial or general way that does not include assuming the police can do no wrong and anyone they shoot has it coming, I still assume that anyone who puts up said signs is willing to excuse police murder, and I make it a point not to talk to them any more than I have to or patronize their businesses. Much the same way if they had a Confederate flag up. How do you feel about such signs, and do you think that my personal boycott is a tad unreasonable? I think the action is what counts. not the possibility that they may have some awareness of the problems with policing in America. That doesn't matter. What matters is what they choose to do. And they choose to put up a sign that says, I side with the cops. And everybody knows this conflict is between cops and people who cops are killing without just cause and facing no consequences for killing them. And if you put up a sign that says, I'm with the police, you are signaling to people that you're with the cops and you're against the people that are supporting the people that the cops have killed for no just cause. So I'm completely on board with avoiding those people and avoiding spending money in those establishments. I would do exactly the same thing. I think you're completely right. And I think if you're someone who is serious about wanting to support police officers, but also wanting to reform police so that these abuses don't happen, and so when they do happen, there are serious consequences for officers who go too far, then you need to take that sign down, number one. Because you can't claim to be a critical supporter of police and then put up a sign like that that identifies you with a circle the wagons type of movement, you know, where it's, oh, we love our cops, don't fuck with our cops, you know. You can't do that. You can't do that. If you want to be someone who supports police reform, then don't put up that sign. And if you do put up that sign, I think people like you and me are perfectly justified in saying, okay, you know what, I'll just walk on by. I'll take my business elsewhere. J.Dotify, Steve, question for this Friday. How do you feel about the North Korea situation? Obviously, the regime over there is terrible and Kim Jong-un needs to be dealt with. I'm just not sure that the Donald is the right guy in this situation. He demonstrates such poor impulse control, and there's nuclear weapons involved in this mess. I just worry that it's going to end up as another proxy war between the USA and the commies when there are possible solutions here, which, while they rely on some military action, would work better if they didn't have USA and Russia saber-rattling going on in the background. The dangerous thing about Trump, remember, of course, is he thinks he understands everything. He thinks he's a genius. He thinks he's an expert on everything. He thinks he understands healthcare. He doesn't. Every word that comes out of his mouth demonstrates that he has no idea what the fuck he's talking about. He doesn't know what healthcare costs. He doesn't know what healthcare consists of. He doesn't know how health insurance works. He doesn't know anything about anything, but he thinks he's got it down. And the same thing has to hold true, you would think, given the man's character, given the man's track record with the military. And when you have a man like Donald Trump with, as the old saying goes, the old cliche, his finger on the button, that is absolutely terrifying. And when you look across the ring, and his adversary in this showdown is someone who is just as erratic and incompetent as he is in the person of Kim Jong-un. Yeah, it's terrifying. It's the kind of thing that makes you wake up at night in a cold sweat. Because Donald Trump doesn't know and he doesn't care. And that's frightening. And I don't know what to do about it. But you're right. Donald Trump is the worst possible person to be in this situation. And he's our guy. Boy, he's my guy. He's the guy of Americans. He's the guy we're stuck with. He's not the guy I wanted. But he's the guy that I'm stuck with. Yeah. Anyway, that's a nice positive, hopeful note to end on. Hey, Donald Trump might start a nuclear war. Anyway, it's time for
the lightning round.
Ahoy, Erno. I really like Django Unchained, and I assume you do as well. What would that movie have been like without all those N-bombs? Do you think it would have been better or worse, and why? Could Tarantino pull that one off? Yeah, of course. I don't think it would have made that big of a difference. I think Tarantino is a brilliant writer, as well as being a fantastic director. And could he write a script that doesn't drop the N-word every other line? Of course he could. And of course, and it could absolutely be a brilliant film. The movie's not great because people are throwing the N-word around. The funniest line in the movie is when Django shoots the guy and says the D is silent, hillbilly. Pfft. No N-word necessary. Scott Bresinger, hey Steve, some music-related preferences, if you please. Okay, punk or disco? Punk. Jazz or hip-hop? Jazz. Jazz. Insane Clown Posse or getting kicked in the nuts by Iron Man? I'm gonna have to go with getting my nuts kicked in by Iron Man. Sorry, Doc. Sorry, other friends of mine who may be watching this who I know are ICP fans. It's just not my thing. I would let Iron Man kick me in the nuts. Der Wunderbar Bar. I attended my mom's funeral at our local church, the 29. I guess the 29th is what you mean. As an atheist, I enjoyed it. It was a nice way to make a final goodbye and get a sense of closure. Did you feel the same way the last time you attended a funeral? Not the last time, well, maybe a little bit the last time. Yeah, to me, my atheism doesn't really make a difference. I think all of the funerals I have been to have been religious in some respect or another. Some have been more overtly religious than others, but they've all had some element there, like a prayer or something like that. And yes, I mean, it's a way of sort of putting a period at the end of the grieving process, you know? I mean, obviously the grieving process privately will go on for you, but the period of grief after the death of your loved one has to end at some point. And I think that's what a funeral can do. It can say, okay, we're going to come together, we're going to say goodbye, we're going to talk about the good times, we're going to cry, we're going to hold each other, and then we're going to move on with our lives, you know? And I think that's important. And I don't think the fact that I'm an atheist really keeps me from getting that from a funeral. Yeah, I mean, sometimes maybe the prayers can be a little annoying, but that's just me personally. I'm not the only person at the funeral. The other people there, I'm sure, take a great deal of comfort in it. Some of them do anyway. So no, I don't have a problem with it. And the fact that I'm not a believer doesn't stop me from drawing some sort of meaning from it. And I'm very sorry to hear about your mother. My condolences. Lucas Hackett, Steve, in your honest opinion, what is the best damn orange soda of all time? Crush, Sunkist, Fanta, or Mountain Dew Livewire? P.S. I figured I'd ask that question since I suddenly got a Keenan and Kel kick thinking of orange soda. I've never had Mountain Dew Livewire, so I can't consider that one. But of the three that I have had, I think I've only had a Fanta once or twice. So it's mainly between Crush and Sunkist for me, and I'm a Sunkist guy, personally. Sunkist has a little bit more of a bite to it. So I'm going to go Sunkist. Zachary Patton, I've been really enjoying your shows, particularly the An Atheist Reads and You Had to Ask series. I wonder if you have any plans for interviews in the future. I think it would be so cool to have you pick the brains of others in the community. To be clear, I'm referring to reasonable members of the community. Aaron Ra, Thomas Smith, Eli Bosnick, etc., not trolls. Yeah, actually, I did a hangout a couple months ago with Eli. Me and Christy Winters did a hangout with him. That went really well. Eli is a great guy. I know Aaron a little bit too. Aaron and I have been in hangouts together, but I've never had him on my channel. But yeah, he would be great. No specific plans, but yeah, I mean, I do that thing from time to time. Just whenever it comes up, whenever I think someone would be good for something, or I have a cool topic of conversation that I think somebody would be right for, I reach out and ask if somebody wants to do a hangout or something. Yeah, no specific plans, but I'll definitely be doing that sort of thing here and there in the future. Lily Blooms, what are your thoughts on the Battlestar Galactica universe? Bonus question, are you a fan of the animated Star Trek series from the early 70s? Another childhood favorite of mine. I haven't watched a lot of Battlestar Galactica, actually. I've seen a few scattered episodes of the original, and I've seen the first season of the more recent one on the Sci-Fi Channel from the early 2000s, and I really, really liked it, but it was one of those things that I never got back into it. I watched the first season because somebody gave me the first season on DVD, and I thought, wow, this is great, I should watch more of this. And then for whatever reason, I just never got around to watching the rest of it. But I really liked what little I saw. And yes, I love the animated Star Trek show. I love it. It's one of my favorite parts of Star Trek. I love the half-hour format. I think that suits Star Trek really well. I think some of the episodes are actually pretty good, and even the bad episodes are fun. And it's Filmation, so you get to see which backgrounds popped up later in He-Man. See, I love it. I love the animated Star Trek show. Sir Kidalot. Hey, Steve, have you ever fired a gun? I agree that gun control in the United States is pretty lackadaisical, but what do you think about people who are responsible gun owners and just enjoy firing a bunch of guns on the range? I think for those people, we should have gun ranges where you can just rent a gun like you rent golf clubs at a putt-putt. How about that? Keep the guns in a centralized location, and when people want to go to sport shoot, they can just rent a gun from the place, and then they don't have to take it home with them, where it can be accidentally the cause of someone's death, or stolen, or used in a fit of rage to hurt somebody. How about that? I mean, if the excuse is, well, people like guns for sports, they like to target shoot, they like to skeet shoot, whatever. How about that? Why do you need to have a gun in your house to do that? And yes, I fired a gun many times. I hunted when I was younger. I haven't fired a pistol too many times, a few times in my life. But I've fired long guns many times. Yeah, I still think we'd be better off if fewer people had them. Crowbro, Steve, there is a new supervillain serial killer on the loose, the chick tract killer, who leaves chick tracks in the mouths of his victims. What superhero brings him to justice first? Oh man, it would be great if it was Dr. Manhattan, wouldn't it? He could just be like, oh, by the way, there is no God. And then he... Or if you want to go for the ironic twist, maybe it's Bible Man. Maybe Bible Man has an attack of conscience and he says, I get the chick tract part, but you can't kill people. I'm sorry, you're going to have to come with me. Maybe something like that. I don't know. You work on it. Write me up a 2-page treatment and get back to me on that. We'll see what we can do. Anyway, that's the last question. That's it for the lightning round. It is time now for the shout out. And this week's shout out is a bit of a repeat shout out from a few months ago, but I'm reminding you of a very awesome event that is coming up next week. The shout out this week goes once again to the Inciting Incident Podcast, and specifically to the Inciting Incident Podcast's live 100th episode spectacular, which takes place a week from today, July 14th at 7 p.m. at the Carlisle Theater in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. So if you are in the area or you can make it to the area, I would love for you to come and join the folks that are going to be on stage and me, who is going to be in the audience for the 100th episode of the Inciting Incident Podcast. Not only will Riss McCool be there as the host as well as her co-hosts for the show, but special guests include Chris Kluwe, and also the hosts of the Scathing Atheist and God Awful Movies, the Gaytheist Manifesto, and the Opening Arguments podcast. It's going to be like a mini progressive atheist podcast convention. It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome to have everybody there. I'm looking forward to meeting everybody. There's a bunch of people that are going to be there that I haven't had a chance to meet in person yet or haven't seen in person for a long time. So it's going to be very cool. And once again, it's at the Carlisle Theater in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, next Friday, July 14th at 7 p.m. So if you can make it, please, please come. It's going to be a great show, and I'm really looking forward to it. And you can find out more about how you can get tickets and how to driving directions and all that stuff and more details on the show itself by going to the Inciting Incident Podcast's Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Inciting Incident Podcast, and it's also linked in the description of this video. So there you go. There's the shout out, the 100th episode of the Inciting Incident Podcast. Please, if you're in the area and you can make it, do come and check it out. It's going to be great. I also want to remind you, as always, speaking of awesome podcasts, that's a good segue, I want to remind you about the Lemme Listen family of podcasts. These are awesome podcasts that are created and co-hosted, for the most part, by my very good friend, Jason Harding. And I want to specifically draw your attention to a little podcast called The Late Seating Podcast, which is something that Jason co-hosts with me, which is part of the Lemme Listen family, where we take a fresh look at a classic movie, a movie that has a reputation of either being really great or really terrible. We give it a fresh review, we make fun of it, we decide for ourselves whether the movie deserves its reputation, be that reputation good or bad. And if you are watching this on the day that I upload the video on Friday, you can check out our brand new episode of Late Seating, which is going up today, and it is our review of the 1974 murder mystery Murder on the Orient Express, directed by the great Sidney Lumet and starring Albert Finney and a cast of practically thousands. It's one of the most impressive casts ever assembled on film, a fantastic group of actors, and you can see whether we like the movie or not, whether we think it should be a classic or not. Did I say see? You can listen. You can hear whether we like the movie and think it should be a classic or not. You can listen to that new episode of Late Seating and all of the past episodes of Late Seating and all of the episodes of all of the wonderful Lemme Listen podcasts by going to lemmelistenpodcast.com. That's it for me, everybody. I am out of here. I am gone. I am smoke. I am history. That's all the cliches I can think of. It's the end of the episode. So I want to remind you, as always, to please leave a comment on this episode asking me your question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can, but in order for that to happen, you have to ask. So please do leave a comment on this video asking me your question for the next You Had to Ask. That's it, folks. Take care. Hey, right, folks, one more thing before I go. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And also, please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.